Welcome to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast. And you're very welcome back to the Hawkeye Sidekick Hurling podcast with your host Mark Kennedy. I'm joined this week by Kieran Collins. How are things, Kieran?
Good, Mark, and yourself?
Sure, great. You know, an awful lot of great games there last weekend. So I suppose our focus is going to be on the All Ireland quarterfinals that were played down in Thurles last weekend. I suppose, Kieran, we'll start from the start. The curtain raiser in Thurles last Saturday was Galway and Cork. I suppose, Kieran, what were your overall impressions of that quarterfinal where Galway won by a point?
Yeah, I suppose for me going into the game, it was a game where I couldn't call it. You were kind of weighing up both sides. Galway, who would have had a fairly steady round robin campaign, and Cork maybe not so much, especially in the earlier rounds. You know, I suppose with a bit of hindsight, you look back and Cork were a team who were really down in the dumps only like 4 weeks ago. I suppose you compare that to Galway, albeit they had a very bad Leinster final against Kilkenny, but they had that consistency from before that in the round robin. And I think it was a tale of, like, I think the first half was so cagey. It was a kind of peculiar game, really. But I think Cork obviously had way more possession, but just wasteful with it. You know, Cork had 47 shots on goal, but only had 22 successful, be it points or goals. So, like, I think that's a stat that'll definitely stand out when they're reviewing and looking back at this game. But I think it was a shot selection for me for Cork that really let them down. Cork would have had goal chances, and the two I can remember, I think Robbie Flynn made a run at goal, and like taking a shot from that far out, like the goalkeepers these days, like they're just so good that that's bread and butter to them. I think O'Flynn possibly, if he'd looked up, I think Collin was on the inside, and he was in open space as well, and that was the option to take. And I think if you compare that to a clinical team like Limerick have shown for the last few years, and it's been taking the right, option. And I think that Cork were probably guilty of that, is not taking the right option. I think as well, Dara Fitz too had a goal chance, and again there probably was options inside if he had taken a look. I think Lehane probably, who had a great year for Cork, coming back into the panel, probably one of his poor days. And I thought it was very it was harsh on Kingston, where they were calling for him after the game that because he'd not started Horgan, they were kind of calling for his head. But I think people were quick to forget, because up to this point, people were calling for Horgan to be dropped. It was kind of out there among different media outlets that Horgan wasn't putting in the same work rate that one of these younger Cork players might be putting in off the ball, and he was there as as just being a free taker. So I think it was kind of harsh in Kingston. They took a chance. They went with Lehane, who had been playing very well all year. Obviously, it just didn't work for him on the day. But I think, Lehane, he missed probably a good few frees. But I think if you look at the two games, there was a lot of missed frees. So to me, that would point to, was it a swirling wind in the ground? Like these guys at the top, they don't miss too many. So like when you see it happen, especially in both games, there might have been something more sinister going on there. But albeit like Cork, they were, on a couple of occasions brought it down to a 1 point deficit. And I thought it was around the 55-minute mark, Cork came back to within one, and it looked like they had real momentum with them. But, it just didn't do anything with it. And, again, Galway come back on top. I suppose looking at Galway, I thought Conor Whelan was immense. The little ball he got on, but 1-2 from scraps really. And I think if you're looking from a defending point of view, Sean O'Donoghue just created, for a cornerback, he was man watching instead of ball watching for Whelan's goal. So instead of looking, playing the ball, he was watching behind him to see where Whelan was. And when Whelan gets in that position, he has the strength, he has that pace, and he's that low gravity where he'll fend you off, you get by you. And well finished goal, but I also think as well that Patrick Collins possibly could have saved it, near post. But yeah, Whelan, the 2 points as well are exquisite, from either side, just very good. Thought Joseph Cooney had a great game, especially when he went back to 6 when McInerney went off. Thought it was really dominant. Yeah, look, Galway have a panel, and maybe this isn't the year, who knows, but I think they're building. They have some really big, young, talented hurlers, and I have a feeling this is like year one of maybe a 2 or 3 year plan. But I think, if Galway are to look at their year so far, they'll be fairly happy. I think the only blip was the defeat to Kilkenny in the Leinster final. But even Éanna Murphy, I thought brilliant. Out of all the goalkeepers, the three, Barry and Murphy, made some very sloppy mistakes. And Éanna Murphy would have took a lot of slack this year, but I thought he had a very good game. His distribution was very good, and definitely was the goalie of the weekend for me.
I definitely agree with you, because I know I was kind of highlighted that in previous podcasts, but in fairness to Éanna, I thought he was one of the Galway players that produced in the Leinster final, and additionally in this quarter final where I thought it was very testing conditions. I was in Thurles. There did seem to be a bit of a swirling breeze, kind of even crossfield to a certain extent, blowing towards the Collin and end. And unfortunately, I think, to be fair, to the likes of Patrick Collins, I suppose not the greatest start in terms of that first goal with Jack Grealish, speculative enough effort. But again, that ball is moving around the place, particularly with that cross field effect here. And I think it rattled Cork. Some of the shot selection did come off that early goal concession. I think they were on their heels a little bit. And as you said, the overall tally, but like 24 shots, 7 scores for Cork in that first half. And given the Conor Whelan strike, a very cute angle again, those concessions really, they're absolute ball breaks for any side in any championship game. But I suppose for Galway, I think the composure that they showed throughout, when Cork were probably losing theirs, I think is probably the most pleasing aspect from Henry Shefflin. And I think his switches did actually work a treat. David Burke came back into the middle third, bossed the game, I thought, for long stretches. Roland Glennon had a magnificent game on Darragh Fitzgibbon. He man-marked him out of it. And Fitzgibbon has been threatening to kind of burst back onto top form. But Glennon's pace and just his work rate was sensational. Johnny Cohn came on again. I know Fitzgibbon may have taken a few scores late, but Cohn, Jason Flynn, Brian Concannon, they chip in with 3 points at the end when games head into balance. So I think from Henry Shefflin's standpoint, the backroom team, the composure they showed was incredible. Dahi Burke, usual suspects. Joseph Cooney, I think, is the natural half-back here. I know they may rush back Gearóid McInerney, but is it really required of Joseph Cooney back there? His physicality, his dominance in the air, his pace as well. I think that could be a bit of a selection poser for Henry Shefflin Sunday week. But I think overall, probably the better side won on the day, Kieran, just given the inaccuracies in his firing of Cork, really.
Probably more complete team performance, I think, is what won it out from. And kind of didn't panic either, even though there was only a point in it at the end, and Cork were pushing. No stupid mistakes. But again, the bench made a huge difference coming on. Concannon didn't start, came on and scored. Cathal Mannion had a great game as well. Compared to the Leinster final where he was well marshalled by Mikey Butler, but you get a feeling that if Galway are to, especially against Limerick, or go any further, or even have aspirations to win the All Ireland, they're going to need more than Whelan up front, digging them out of it every game, because Whelan is their standout forward. I think Cathal Mannion is probably just sharp behind him, but I think they're going to need more of a collective. The forward unit collectively is going to have to stand up more to win an All Ireland, or to get even to the All Ireland final. I think Conor Cooney kind of obviously doing very well on the freeze, but from play for the last game or two, he hasn't really been scoring. And I think the day is gone where any player on the field, especially in the forward 6 or forward 8, needs to be scoring.
And I think it's a nice place for Galway to be in. Obviously, they're through, maybe by the skin of their teeth, given the Patrick Horgan late free that went wide. They'll know they have work to do. Probably going under the radar a little bit in the All-Ireland semi-final. I think all the focus will be on Limerick as well to do a job on Galway. But this Galway team historically in recent years have had no fear of Limerick and vice versa. And these games usually take a life of their own, particularly in the physicality stakes and particularly in that middle third battle. And I don't see anything really changing that much Sunday week. So I think Henry Shefflin probably had plenty of evidence to come back with the Galway team in training this week to kind of limber up for next week's challenge. And as you say, I think Cathal Mannion will have to play a huge role in any All-Ireland semi-final win. He came up trumps with 4 points, but is he going to get that same freedom and space in the middle third that he got against Cork? Cork, I thought, were very loose defensively at times. He seemed to find pockets and regular intervals, and I think, to be fair to Limerick, Limerick's defensive systems will shut that down. So, as you said, there are questions to answer here for Henry Shefflin and the backroom staff. But again, it's probably a glorious opportunity and one that Henry Shefflin will absolutely relish. I suppose, Kieran, just in terms of Cork, they're out of the championship. It's probably a game full of regrets, but do you see any plus points here for Cork going forward, and what do you see plans-wise for next season? I've seen kind of Niall Moran's comments. I've seen a few other media pundits in terms of maybe Cork doing a complete rebuild next season. Do you see that happening here, Kieran, as part of the Alliance Hurling League?
So one thing we all know about Cork is they're a proud hurling county, and they kind of they're kind of set in their ways, and I think it's kind of like I think it's shown even this year, like the trimming they took in the All Ireland final last year, but it's still to turn up this year and do the very same thing. Like there was no major changes from the game plan that was played last year. I think if Cork were to focus on one area, I think it would be their physical strength. I think if I'm Kingston, I'm still in the job. I'd have these lads in the gym now. It's not something that can be changed overnight. They're still trying to, they're working scores from the half back line. They want to run a goal, and I think teams have kind of, they've shut it down, or they know how to shut it down easily. You pack out that middle area, and it's not as effective. And yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see. I don't think they'll rush a decision. I saw somewhere, it was one of our newspapers, where Kingston must be offered one more year, which was kind of surprising. I thought this would have been it for him. So I think it all depends who remains. Is it the same management team or a new management team? There's a lot of talk, I suppose, with Cork that the likes of Ben O'Connor, they'd like to see give him a goal because of the job he's done with Middleton, and he has probably a good CV at this stage in management. I suppose it's really hard to know, but I do know if they stick with this current management setup, they can't just come up again next year playing the same style of hurling and brand of hurling. I think maybe back in the 90s where it was, wasn't as physical or as tactical, but I think the bigger, stronger teams can outplay Cork at a running game.
And it's not as if Kieran Kingston had a mediocre backroom staff with him. They've moved mountains to get the backroom staff that they had. The psychologist, I know Christy O'Connor in terms of goalkeeping coach, moved in during the off season. You had The Rock, Dermot Sullivan. You had various guys there that are hurling brains. Donal O'Grady was in the setup in some shape or form.
Pat Mulcahy as well, I think, which is highly regarded.
Exactly. So it's not as if they didn't have hurling minds here to read the Fly's scheme. Now, what I was hearing from Cork, now James Mulcahy is not here tonight, but it was all about circumstance last year in that All Ireland hurling final, about the lead up to the throw in, and that spooked them and all this, that, and the other. But as we've seen in the Alliance Hurling League, there was always a vulnerability, particularly right down the middle of the park for Cork, particularly defensively. And maybe they have now Kieran Joyce. They've identified maybe Alan Connolly as a full forward. But still, there is maybe questions to answer in terms of the goalkeeping position. Fullback has never been settled in Cork. And if you don't have a steady full back line and goalkeeping unit here, where are you going to go as an intercounty team? And I think they have massive defensive issues. Coleman switched to wing back, but is he a favoured wing back? Should he be going more midfield, half forward line? Tim O'Mahony made the switch. It's not as if they don't have talent coming through in the minors and under 20s. I think maybe an opportunity here to blood a few guys, particularly in those positions, and see where they go long term and really commit to these players. But yeah, I heard those media reports on Kieran Kingston. 1 year contract only. That's not a ringing endorsement of Kieran Kingston, by the way. I think if Kieran Kingston, you'd want to be looking for a 2-3 year additional contract. But, you hear those media reports and maybe it's kind of leaks again from wherever, but it just doesn't sit well, immediately after a performance, a heartbreaking loss for Cork. But again, a meagre 1 year contract for Kieran Kingston, who's committed an awful lot of time and energy to this Cork set, seems a bit of an insult. Yeah,
and look, I was actually thinking about it there during the week, looking back. Okay, Cork were in the All Ireland final last year, but if you look back at their run of games to get there, like Clare were within a puck of a ball away from beating them. Tony Kelly uncharacteristically had what do we call it, maybe a sitter in soccer terms, that he missed that would have put him out. And it took extra time to beat, like a Kenny team who are not the strength they used to be. So I think it was kind of a falls down last year when they were in the final, and I think Limerick probably showed the gulf in class, and I think maybe Cork bought into that falls down and thought they were better than what they were. And if you're looking into this year, like it's been up to a month ago, Cork were in disarray. Going into that Waterford game, like Cork were down, like they were having group meetings in Photo Wildlife or Wildlife Park. It was all highlighted. Like that's only 4 or 5 weeks ago, So they beat a Waterford team who the wheels had completely fallen off, and a Tipperary team to get to these latter stages. So, like, if Cork think that they're anywhere close to winning All Ireland, they're not. So, making a few player positional changes during the year isn't going to bridge that gap. As I mentioned earlier, during the year, like it's a system failure. It's their game plan is just not working. And as I say, if they turn up again next year with this same game plan, it'll be quarterfinal at best stage again next year.
If they're lucky, I think. I think there's going to be massive reflections in Cork, particularly on this season, how it's gone, the optimism of the All Ireland Hurling League. They were riding very high, and then Waterford gave them an absolute thumping again. It was like an All Ireland Hurling final revisited, Nightmare Part 2. And again, there was that aftershock effect. Limerick in the opening round of the Munster Championship really exposed their frailties again, confidence-wise. Clare then did the job in round 2, and as you say, is the form line all that it was cracked up to be? Particularly round 3 against Waterford, and Tipperary, probably arguably one of the worst Tipperary teams in Munster Senior Hurling Championship history, let's be frank about it. And then they go then into the qualifiers and had a sticky enough opening period against Antrim in Corrigan Park. So it's not as if the form line was absolutely outstandingly brilliant heading into this quarter final. I think probably the performance at the weekend probably is a perfect reflection of where Cork are. It was the good, bad, and the ugly, really.
Yeah, and if you're going to, I suppose they're going to really look into it, but like, I think the chalk and cheese from this last year to this year, Patrick Collins, who was an All-Star nominee last year, I thought he had a very poor year this year. Defensively, there's still huge question marks. You mentioned earlier that they haven't nailed down their full back, until you have a resident 3, 6, and maybe midfield especially, like, you're not going to win All Irelands, So I think I think next year they should plan on, like, I think Joyce is a real find for centre back, and I think he will be centre back for many years to come. But they need to find a steady full back in behind him, and have it like that. Sean O'Donoghue, I thought I was a great year last year, but when you see him against Whelan the other day, like for a corner back to not be playing the ball, like Whelan should not have got the opportunity to score that goal last weekend. When the pressure came on Lehan, he obviously not going to be critical. He had a great year, but this is knockout hurling. This is their first weekend in knockout hurling, and they just didn't perform on the big day. So again, I don't know, will Horgan be there next year? Obviously one of the elder statesmen in the Cork team, might be happy with being dropped all year. These are question marks, and it's kind of like Galway playing without Canning. If they're going into next year, Cork playing without Horgan, again, big boots to fill. But yeah, I think it'll be a long summer or winter in Cork, but definitely something they will be looking at is the physicality of the team. They just don't seem to lay a glove on teams defensively. And, I think nowadays, the way hurling's being played, you need to mix it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with you, Kieran. And I suppose with Galway, it's a case of into the semi-finals, as we say, a little bit under the radar. And again, it'll be a fascinating encounter between Limerick and Limerick. It's a great rivalry there built up in the last couple of years. And I think Henry Shefflin will relish that, particularly taking into account maybe Kilkenny's tactics in 2019 a little bit in the All-Ireland semi-final. How they compressed the final third, worked like dogs. And again, they have a viable threat in Conor Whelan. Brian Cannon as well, is fabulous hurler as well. It'll be very interesting to just see how Shefflin kind of gets that. And as well, the Gerald McInerney situation will be probably media talk about it. But again, it's kind of shown. I don't think Galway defensively are in bad shape here. I think they've really been very prominent in an awful lot of their games. And I think Aidan Murphy in goals as well has been a real kind of increasing influence for them as well. Daithí Burke back to his best. And I thought Joseph Cooney really solidified an awful lot of things there. There was a bit of a run game going with Cork, particularly in those first 20 minutes. And to be fair to Galway, Cooney really did steady the ship, particularly, and same with Porrick Mannion as well. Fintan Burke as well. I think that is an outstanding half-back line that matches up, I think, quite well with that Limerick half-forward line. I think that'll be a fascinating watch on Sunday week, Kieran. But I suppose we can move on to the second game in Thurles last Saturday, and that was Wexford against Clare. Now, Kieran, you're based in Wexford. Again, everything looked to be going so rosy with 10 minutes to go in normal time, a second half, 6 points up, and Clare then came with a dramatic fight back. I suppose, Kieran, from a Wexford point of view, what's been the general mood of the county from the elimination?
Yeah, I think going into the game, there wasn't a whole, not among everyone, a whole lot of hope. I think the consensus was they give a good rattle, but I don't think many thought that they would actually see it out. But, I think, it was in their grasp. And if they're looking back at it, I think the reason why is not having a battle-hardened bench to come on. And that was the difference in the day. Like, Wexford started really well. Jack O'Connor goal after 30 seconds, ideal start. And I think really they should have probably made more hay in that first half, going in level at half time with playing all the hurling. I think as well, Clare missed an awful amount of frees in that first half. Tony Kelly and Duggan. Probably the time Wexford really should have taken advantage of that. But I think for Kilkenny going in facing Clare, I think Wexford have shown a few frailties that could and would be targeted. The twin towers, they call them, like Chin and Conor MacDonald inside, caused real trouble for Clare. The long ball going in, and at times like there were, Chin got one, maybe two if he got the flick on it. He could have had another two where there was one where the ball obviously blazed over the bar, and then obviously the pull down as well. So I think Chin especially really caused trouble in there. And I think if you're alone, you'd be kind of, you'd be worrying going into a Kilkenny game where you might be seeing the likes of Massey Keown and TJ Reid inside. Kilkenny might play, we all know Kilkenny likes to play long ball, so it could be an area that they try and target. But I think Lohan showed his ruthlessness, taking, like, Rory Hayes obviously made a clumsy error, and to be taken off after 8 minutes, like, I think even the great Cody hasn't done the likes of that. And by all accounts, it wasn't an injury because he actually played for Wolf Tones the next day. Obviously he wasn't taking any chances with him. For Rory Hayes, it's been a real, like, roller coaster year, like being on people's lips for an All-Star nominee earlier on in the early rounds to now, falling out of favour even to make the team possibly. But like at half time, I suppose from a Wexford point of view, I was kind of saying, I think they're going to need at least 2 goals to have any chance to see this out. And, it was probably a 6-point turnaround. It could have been where, I think it was Galvin's shot hit the crossbar and Chin went down and got the goal. And, you're 6 points up. You're thinking, you're playing the better hurling, it's there. But I think the Clare bench was the difference. 1-4 off the bench from Clare. Mikey Dwyer got one for Wexford, but Mikey Dwyer came in for Rory O'Connor when he went off, so I wouldn't even count that as an impact sub at the end. So effectively, Wexford had no score from the bench, and I think that's the difference. The team who finished the game is as important that the team who start the game, and I think just, I think this is actually a problem that Darragh Egan has probably inherited from Davy Fitzgerald at times, because Davy seemed to play his certain guys, and outside of that, the fringe players found it hard to make an impact. So I think in the off season, Darragh Egan is definitely something you have to look at, is looking at every player in the county and just to try and strengthen up that bench. I suppose looking at it for Clare, the 3 guys who would have been mentioned in the Munster final, Tony Kelly, Ryan Taylor, David Fitzgerald, to me had a very quiet game. I think Shane Reck did an absolutely unbelievable job of Tony Kelly, holding him to a point while he was on the field. And I think it even showed how good a job he did do, because Tony Kelly scored 3 within 5 or 6 minutes when Shane Reck had to go off. I think for Clare, it's a good sign of a team to play bad and win, and the way they finished as well. It's players having quiet games. You get away with that up to this stage, but I think for Clare to win All Ireland, they need everyone 1 to 15 to be playing to their top of their game. they can't afford to have players having quiet days.
I'd agree with you there, Kieran, particularly on the quiet days, because maybe I hinted on it last week about the energy levels of Clare. Would it be a concern? We kind of maybe dismissed it a little bit. Maybe that was a bit of a contributing factor, a little bit. They looked a bit lifeless at times. Think of in terms of Cathal Malone, who's very Mr. Reliable there in the middle turf for Clare. I think he had about 2 opportunities to score, bays wide, but just looked jaded, looked not at the pitch of the game. And to be fair to Clare, it was a magnificent comeback. But as you say, with Kilkenny and Brian Cody, who's probably in the crowd scouting here, looking at Quilligan again, there was another kind of goal. Now, you can argue all you want about square balls and everything else, but the fact of the matter was that Wexford asked questions of Clare defensively on the aerial ball, and Clare really didn't have much answers. I'm even thinking that Nolan takedown of Chin. I mean, that has triggered an awful lot of debate in terms of markings on the pitch and whether it should have been a black card or not. But you can see Kilkenny exposing a cornerback here for Clare very quickly on Saturday week. First few balls into a TJ Reid, catching, Keohane, bang, back in the net. And then all of a sudden Clare on the back foot. And just from a Clare perspective, the Rory Hayes substitution, to me, the player's probably mindset probably was completely off. And I think that's more a management issue in terms of not sensing that beforehand and not trusting Nolan to start from the start. I thought it was poor management off Lohan, to be perfectly fair. And I mean, for Rory Hayes, his confidence has to be completely on the floor. So I think if Hayes features on Saturday week, I think that'll be a major miracle because of giving that treatment and given it's his own club man as well. It is what it is. It's a brutal sport, intercounty hurling, but I think 9 minutes, as you said, Kieran, I've never seen Brian Cody do that before. So I wonder, morale-wise in the squad, seeing something like that, maybe colleagues of Rory Hayes, who he's close to, I mean, surely that must have a bit of a ruction or a bit of a morale kind of issue in that camp. There's a precedent being set here.
Yeah, I think, during the game, I think everyone probably had the impression that there was an injury there, and that's why he was taken off. But I think when the word came out that it wasn't an injury and he was hauled off for, I suppose, for an error he had made, like, it is early and it has to affect the mindset of a player. Like Rory Hayes, as I said, the roller coaster year, to go from, All-Star nominee to, okay, and look, when you look back at the games, the recent games, like Desi Hudson scored 1-6 off him and Jamie Flanagan scores 8 points. So, you probably would question the All-Star nominee, I suppose, really, after them 2 performances. It's just not something you see, like, are we going down that road of, like, we're not robots, players aren't robots, again, people forget this is an amateur sport. They're doing this for our good more than their own. And, I thought it was very harsh on Lohan, especially after 8 minutes.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, I think it'll be a fascinating watch to see who actually slots in a cornerback. Maybe it's a psychology kick. We don't know Rory Hayes personally, whether that kind of will jolt him into elevated performances. Brian Lohan and Rory Hayes are club mates and club colleagues in Wolfe Tones and Shannon, so they would have a close bond, close connection there. So all remains to be seen. But back to Clare, I suppose it was a magnificent fight back, given the 6 points down. You Chin, MacDonald, who would also miss a great chance in the opening half as well, Kieran. I thought Clare were haunted to be level at half time, just given Wexford dominance in the middle third. McGovern, there was an awful lot of ball that was won in that half back line for Wexford particularly, and I thought maybe it was a little bit of an opportunity lost for Wexford a bit in that first half to maybe have a 4 or 5 point lead at half time, because they were definitely the dominant side, I thought.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I mentioned it earlier where, I think looking back, if you were to look back at it, they could have been 3 or 4 points up at half time. Clare were very wasteful. Wexford did all the hurling and ran at Clare, I suppose, and troubled them at times. And, different game then if they're coming out 4 points up and, get an early goal or 2 like they got. Probably pull it outside of Clare's reach at that stage. Yeah, look, a real good sign of a team to be able to bounce back, 6 points down with 10 minutes to go. Didn't seem to panic. I think Aaron Chandler coming on, great game, 1-2. He's one of these players where, to me, I think he's kind of hot and cold, really. But 1-2, and by all accounts, played for Wolf Tones of Shannon the day after and scored 3-2.
Yeah.
So, what this fella going into an All Ireland semi-final, this shows what form he's in. So, you imagine this guy coming off the bench if the game's in the metal pot, what is he going to bring you? And I think that's what's needed now, and that's what Wexford didn't have. Also, as well, you look at Clare had 45 shots on goal, Wexford 29. So I think that's the difference. Like, scoring 14 points is probably not enough to win matches, at this level. Okay, I might take 3 goals, but 14 points is a very low return at this level. And I think that's something like Limerick kind of judge themselves on, numbers, and it's shot numbers and scored shots, but like 29 shots at goal is just not enough. But yeah, the only thing actually one for Wexford point of view is Mark Fanning. I thought probably had the poorest year he's had in recent years, and there's a lot of knives out from around this area. Looking into next year, it's one area Wexford have never really looked at outside of Mark Fanning over the last few years. No one's really got a chance, so it's hard to know is there any better there. But yeah, I think he's been poor, not just in shot stopping, but I think in distribution as well.
Yeah, because in fairness to Mark Fanning, he does score the goal, speculative efforts. He did have a previous moment before the Shanahan goal, didn't he, where he did drop a kind of a ball from distance and got away with it. And again, unfortunately, with the goal that went in, it was just fine margins again. He drops the ball, and you'd hope then as a goalkeeper, your full back line may come to your rescue. But again, the marking there was a little bit kind of on the loose side, maybe from a full back line perspective from Wexford. Shanahan scores a goal, and the whole dynamic of the changes. You could see body language a little bit on one or two of the Wexford players wane after that goal goes in. The Clare crowd behind Fanning's goal just literally erupt, and I think
momentum was switched down at that stage.
Exactly, and then as you say, Shane Reck had done a magnificent job. Tony Kelly could go no further, and then you see the final stats with Tony Kelly, Shane O'Donnell. They emerged from the game with 6 points, but I think at least 4 of them came literally in the closing stages when the game opened up. Players coming out for Wexford not really at the pitch of the game, and just Kelly getting that extra yard of space and really executing very well. And again, Shane Meehan, a guy that Rory Walsh, who's usually on our podcast, would have highlighted, comes on 2 points from play. Mark Rogers coming into the side. An awful lot of that injury list is now coming back from Clare. Aidan McCarthy as well, who's going to be a massive player if he gets any game time here. Kieran as well for Kilkenny, because that certainly will be needed in the middle third battle, particularly against Kilkenny, because you know how Kilkenny will set up. Really, the middle third will be physicality central.
Yeah, Ed McCarthy, by all accounts, played for Aina Kilmona last weekend and played very well. So I think you'd expect to see him at some stage next weekend. I think he'll add another dynamic to that team. Young Hurler of the Year nomination, was it 2 or 3 years in a row? So another great player. And I think what Clare are doing is what the top teams probably need to do is the bench. You've Aaron Shanner, you've Shane Meehan, Mark Rogers. Like these guys are game winners. And for young guys, like the experience they're gaining, and if Clare don't do it this year, definitely next year they'll be going in with that extra bit of experience and drive. They're definitely going about things the right way.
Yeah, and this is a Clare side. An awful lot of that squad have massively good memories of Croke Park. In All Ireland semi-finals, All Ireland finals, back to the big dance. We say that about Kilkenny being Croke Park their second home, but Clare traditionally have always put it up to Kilkenny. There seems to be no fear factor from Clare, and even comments I've seen from a few Clare colleagues at work and other Clare people that I know, they feel very confident in terms of this All Ireland semi-final, that they reckon the momentum is up, that they will deliver a performance which is, any other county. I think it's dangerous talk, but I think Clare's historically have really put it up to Kilkenny, and they feel this time that they will get over the line against Kilkenny and get into an All Ireland hurling final.
Yeah, it's fight and talk. Kilkenny, yeah, they're not the team they were, but they're still no walkover. I think they'll definitely trouble them. I think looking at the Wexford game, Kilkenny will have learned a lot. I think definitely long ball in, like Chin and McDonald really gained from that. Um, I think as well Shane Reck showed, you mark Tony Kelly, and he doesn't have the same influence he has as like against Limerick, the two games where he wasn't marked. He ran the show, but you just don't give him the ball, or even limit the amount of chances he gets on the ball. He can't do as much damage. So I think, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong in this, but I've seen Mikey Butler marking Cathal Mannion for Galway. Would he be one to pick up Tony Kelly possibly? So I think Kilkenny will have watched and will have learned a bit about this Clare team. Albeit Clare won't fear Kilkenny, but Kilkenny are they're no walkovers either, and they've had 4 weeks, which is what Clare haven't had, and Cody's he tries in these situations, and this is where he wants to be, and Cody wants to be back in All Ireland final. So I wouldn't say it's a foregone conclusion, but yeah, I still would fancy Clare, but I think Kilkenny would not be walkover.
I'm with you too. More in hindsight, in terms of what I saw with Galway and Kilkenny, was a massively physical encounter. Clare are going to have to up that again. Even from the Munster final, they're going to have to up that level again. Do they have that gear? I think midfield-wise, in terms of David Fitzgerald and also Colin Malone, they have to be absolutely ruthlessly dominant in that middle midfield exchange, really stuffing out the threat of Adrian Mullen, who can chip in with 3 to 4 points from play. Again, I think there's question marks over this Clare full back line after Wexford. And as you say, no better man than Cody see the case study of Wexford. So I think from that perspective, I think it's an absolute humdinger of an All-Ireland semi-final. If it does go maybe down to the bench, I would maybe favour Clare a little bit more. If there's a scenario here where Kilkenny are 5 to 6 points up with 10 minutes to go, Clare may come back into the game, but is it going to be enough? I think that could be the kind of the mantra here. So I think from Clare, as you say, they're going to have to be fully on it in terms of their Munster final performance. Were 1 to 15, actually 1 to 19. Really did deliver a performance. That's going to have to happen again, because if there is a replica of that Wexford display, there's only one team going to win, and that's going to be Kilkenny. But yeah, I think even going back to Wexford here, Kieran, just in terms of Darragh Egan, his first year in charge, you've kind of mentioned it in terms of squad depth here. I know you've told me off air here that the Wexford Championship is starting next week. Any kind of key players here that do you think Darragh Egan should be looking at, or is it just cast the net out across all the clubs and really see who the talent is and bring him into the squad next season?
Yeah, I think they really need to go into the club championship with an open mind. The talent pool probably isn't there compared to what other counties might have. That'd be the one thing that I think Wexford will look back, and I think they're fairly happy with the year they've had. I expected a real hangover from the David Fitzgerald times, and I really thought that key players would have been tired after the last few years, like the work rate they were putting into every game. But I think, Wexford's league, obviously there were, no complaints. I think the only blip along the way of the league was the semi-final performance to Waterford, which, I don't think anyone saw coming. And looking back, I suppose they were the Galway game. Galway should have had that game home and hosed by half time, but didn't. They were wasteful. They still held on and got the point out of that game. But I suppose it's the surprise games along the way, like the Dublin game, where Dublin were probably similar to Wexford this year, a bit hot and cold, but the Westmeath game as well, coughing up a point there, like the surprise blips along the way, and then you go and see them play Kilkenny, where they absolutely blew Kilkenny off the park. And again with Clare, to be fair, I think if you're looking back, Clare won, but I think Wexford were a better team for 60 minutes, without a doubt. And I think the bench was what let them down at the end when it came to it. I think even Darragh Egan, in his aftermath comments, said that they basically ran out of bodies, is what he was quoted to say. So I think it's something they really look at. I think physicality wise, they probably have it. Fitness, they have it. They finish games strongly. I just think it's to uncover a few maybe players that are, whether young guys or established guys, and try to get them up to speed, because it's a 20 man game, 23-man game. You're not going to win All Irelands with 17, 18 lads.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Kieran. I think Darragh Egan, I think he's had a great year now. I think the Westmeath draw as well in this Hurling Championship was probably a reality check for him and the team to a certain extent. Now, take nothing away from Joe Fortune and Westmeath. They actually delivered a great performance on the day in Mullingar. But I think it did kind of show Darragh Egan a bit in terms of squad depth not being quite there. And as you say, Darragh Egan being very meticulous. There's a few more under-20s to come into that side. I'm thinking of Byrne, particularly inside full forward. Scoring threat, because Rory O'Connor was a massive loss there as well, Kieran. Going off so early against Clare, if he was inside there as well, along with Chin and MacDonald, my God, there would have been absolute carnage in that second half. But I think for Darragh Egan, he's pragmatic. I think there's been plenty of positives. I think the players have played with a smile on their face in Wexford. Don't think that was the case at the end of the Davy Fitz era. I think it was very kind of pressure of the world on them, a bit of a siege mentality, and I think that had kind of died a miserable death come the end. So I think Darragh Egan has brought a bit of freshness to it. Maybe, looking maybe astutely at maybe making another backroom addition or two, and, go again and identify a few more players to come off the bench, particularly in that Alliance Hurling League, that they do have that strong 25, 28-man squad that he can depend upon if injuries do come in. Because Lee Chin, his season was a bit curtailed. He was growing with every match. But again, they're looking for leaders, particularly in that forward line, middle third. And, as you said, rightfully, captain superbly, Kieran, ran out of bodies, particularly in that last 10 minutes. But yeah, no, I think it's been a good season for Wexford overall. But again, probably what might have been, having a bit of a goal against Limerick potentially in a All Ireland semi-final, probably been a huge attraction to Wexford, to be fair. But yeah, all to play for Clare Saturday week. I suppose, Kieran, before we leave the All Ireland semi-finals, we haven't really talked about Limerick, have we? In terms of preparation, seeing local Limerick media reports stating that Cian Lynch is on par to maybe kind of make an appearance during that All Ireland semi-final against Galway, which is a timely boost for Limerick ahead of that Galway clash.
Yeah, I think Kylie, I actually saw his interview and I think he was still a little bit cagey. It doesn't give much away, so whether he starts or is, we might see 15, 20 minutes of him. But I think an even bigger player, I think, who is back and is training and by all accounts going very well is Peter Casey. I think he's what we've been missing, this year. You look back to his All Ireland final performance. The All Ireland final, he was just unmarkable. Up to that point where the 25, 26 minutes, he had 5 points scored. So yeah, I'd really like to see Casey getting back in, and I think with Casey coming back in, it possibly allows you to bring Kyle Hayes back out the field to where he's more effective. So look, hopefully Cian will start. He's our Tony Kelly, so if you're gonna, he's Limerick's best player and creator, so it will be a timely addition to the team. But I think for Limerick, look, yeah, Galway, I suppose, in the latter stage of the competition are the only team that have really put up to them over the years. Like the 18 final, as we all know how tight that finished. Again, and there was a 2020 where they were the closest team to Limerick all year. Was it 3 or 4 points was the margin in the end?
Sure, it was Limerick taken after 70 minutes. Kieran, it could have gone either way, really.
Limerick really struggled to kind of close it out that day. So I think traditionally, over the last few years, Galway are the team that got closer to Limerick, and probably down to their sheer size and physicality. But one thing that Galway, the last day for me, they lost half of their own puckouts, which I think for Sheffield would be a worrying stat. Going up against a team who pride themselves on retaining ball. I know Galway traditionally are kind of never too worried about, winning ball, but it's kind of winning the breaking ball maybe more so. But I think if Limerick can retain ball and win ball, I think that's where Galway might struggle. I think you need to win more than half. I think that's one area that Limerick could possibly trouble Galway.
Yeah, I think that puckout stat really was probably one of those ones for Sheffield that he's really going to have to hone in, particularly on his half-forward line, particularly. And wasn't as if that half-forward line were a small half-forward line, very big physical players. And I think if that is repeated on Sunday week, particularly against Limerick, you imagine likes of Declan Hannon or Dermot Burns, they're going to be shooting from distance, and more times than not, they could be 8-9 points from play very easily from that half back line. And it'll be a very interesting play from Shefflin how he's going to set up here. Is he going to fundamentally change the Galway style here? Or is he going to just go very much direct style, particularly in the puckouts? And I suppose from Limerick, the Kyle Hayes kind of conundrum is there, isn't it? It'll be a fascinating watch. Again, probably wasted inside into the full forward line. Does he go back wing back? If he goes back wing back, then obviously Dan Morrissey seems to be the guy that's going to be omitted here. But Morrissey's played pretty solid again this season. So I think it's some intriguing kind of subplots here. And as well, like Bill O'Donoghue, Darragh O'Donovan, emerging again from that Munster final, a bit more form, particularly at the end of the game. Are we going to see more of a form line from that midfield duo as well? Because you can see David Burke putting in a massive shift for 45-50 minutes. It will be intriguing to see Ronan Glennon probably getting the nod again, and Johnny Cohn. So I think from that perspective, yeah, it's going to be an intriguing one for Galway. I think how they're going to kind of solve a little bit in terms of their, dare I say, attacking kind of shape issues. Because they did fade out a little bit against Kilkenny in that second half in the Leinster Hurling final. And if a repeat happens again, there's only going to be one winner here. But yeah, I think for Limerick, does the layoff have a factor here at all, Kieran? 4 weeks. Same with Kilkenny. I know Kilkenny are kind of masters at managing this 4 weeks, but is there any kind of fear from Limerick here being prepared on this?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think like if you look back at the last few years, it's the route they've traditionally gone winning Munster for the last 3 or 4 years. To have it's not something that's going to be new to them. Like they've managed it well over the last few years. Like look back at the semi-final last year. Waterford kept at them strong. If you remember that first quarter, and Limerick still led going into the water break. So maybe the start could be you're probably worrying area, but I think most teams like Clare having the 2 weeks off to the Wexford game. I think we kind of saw a bit of a hangover from that Munster final in the Clare performance, especially in the first half. And their bigger players, the players who have played well in that Munster final, not having as good a game. So I think 2 weeks is probably not enough, and maybe 4 weeks is on the upper end of enough. Maybe 3 is the ideal, but I think they'll have the week or two to maybe not take it easy, but to enjoy themselves after the Munster final, get back to a bit of light training, get the bodies healed and ready again, and get back into it. So I think Kylie they'll know how to manage the time, I suppose, is the most important thing. And I think the lads will be chomping at the bit to get going again.
Exactly. Kieran, can we call it on the All Ireland Hurling semi-finals? I suppose Clare, Kilkenny. You were kind of hinting there, Clare. Are you still going with them?
Yeah, performance, I suppose. Looking at them especially in the championship this year, bar the Wexford game, I suppose was a little bit of a blip. They've performed consistently, and I think that's what's when you get to the latter stages of this competition, like it's the teams who perform consistently well, get the results. Kilkenny probably slowly built up, mediocre, I suppose, round robin, and I think they'd have been hurting after that Wexford loss, but they really power back against Galway. I don't think they'll fear Clare, and I think after that Wexford game there'll be areas in which they'll target Clare as well, the same. And but I think you'll just Clare with the bench they have probably is a bit stronger. Kilkenny's, like I mentioned, Aaron Shanahan scoring. I suppose if you look at it, 4 goals and 4 points in 2 games, like the likes of this coming off the bench is probably what Kilkenny don't have. But Kilkenny will target. I'm sure Owen Cody will be one that Lohan will be looking at how to handle. I suppose you imagine Paul Flanagan will pick up him. Yeah, look, I suppose based on the consistency of Clare, and you probably have to fancy him against Kilkenny. And regarding Limerick and Galway, it's kind of strange for Limerick man to be. I suppose we're used to being underdogs for as long as I can remember. But I think they haven't really shown the heights of what they've shown maybe the past, or the last year or two. I think they're probably building nicely. We were injury hit probably all year, or majority of the year, and I think to get Casey and potentially Lynch back on, there have to be a massive boost to Limerick, and these are two big players for Limerick. So I think based on that, you'd have to go with Limerick.
Kind of agree with you there, particularly on Limerick. I think Limerick, the key word is performance, isn't it? If Limerick can produce a performance on the day, I don't think Galway's best will beat Limerick. But I do think Galway will put it up to them. I think I've seen some people's comments in terms of that Galway performance, but Galway will raise their game for Limerick. There's no fear of that. I just think so's bench boys for Limerick. It's probably going to edge it, but I think there's going to be probably nothing in this with 20 minutes to go. But I think Limerick by maybe 4 or 5. And then for the Clare-Kilkenny game, I'm going to go against Clare. I just think that Kilkenny may have a master plan here to really exploit that full back line of Clare and hit maybe an early goal or 2-goal burst here that really does kind of stretch it out to a 4 or 5 point game, having Clare to chase a game. And as well as that, they need Peter Duggan inside Clare to really perform. No score from play against Wexford, which if that happens again against Kilkenny, I think that's a big psychological win for Kilkenny. I just have this feeling here in terms of Kilkenny. It's, even though the performance was very workmanlike against Galway, I just thought the way that they ground out that result, they're going to do the same against Clare. And just wondering again, that 2-week gap again, is there going to be tired bodies from a Clare perspective here? Well, for me, I think it could be Kilkenny here and Limerick in an All Ireland Hurling final. You could very easily be a chef in the Cody final as well. You just never know. But I think it's a Kilkenny-Limerick game. I just have that sense of Kilkenny that they're behind, quite behind the scenes. Nobody's talking about them. All the hype is going to be this week about Clare and Limerick. And you have two teams here in the Leinster Hurling Championship chomping at the bit. I think these could be two very competitive games. Kieran, we'll leave it there anyway. Many thanks for your insights, contributions as always this week anyway. And look, we'll kind of run the rule over the All Ireland Hurling semi-finals following week. Many thanks, Kieran.
Cheers, Mark.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. If you liked what you heard in this podcast, why not subscribe to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast on either Amazon, Spotify, YouTube or Twitter platforms. You can also follow me at Hawkeye Sidekick on Facebook and Twitter for the latest sporting opinions, articles and reports.